All right, I'm working on this Echo chainsaw today, CS-310. This belongs to a friend of mine. And I was just looking it over for her, and when I pushed the purge valve, I got a little fuel squirting out at me. It has, there we go, it has a little leak off to the side, so I'm just gonna replace this for her. And I thought I'd just show you how easy it can be to work on these things if you're a little bit intimidated. And along the way, I'll just show you a few things you need to be keeping an eye on for your own chainsaw. For what it's worth, I love Echoes. I love Japanese manufacturers in general. In the automotive world, they do a great job and they have great reputations, and they make their stuff really easy to work on in general, and so I really appreciate that. So the cover comes out with just a couple clips. This is an area you want to keep clean on your chainsaw, and you can keep this area clean in a handful of different ways. A really great option is to use compressed air from a compressor and just blow all that debris out of there. If you don't have a compressor, you can use a brush. Something like a paintbrush is good, where you have long bristles that go straight in. A brush like this is not very useful to get in there. You can also just use a garden hose. If you keep the saw tipped this way, you won't get any water into the engine. The things will dry out if you set it out in the sun. And these things are robust enough and built in a way where they can get wet and not have a problem. Now, if you did flood the area with water and you had it tipped this way, you could get water in the engine, but don't do that and you'll be fine. All right, moving on. So this air filter is a little bit funny design, but nonetheless, it's a toolless removal. It just kind of slides up that way. This is something, if you have dirt on this side of your air filter, you've already had a problem. You're not supposed to get anything on this side of the air filter. That stuff's getting sucked into your engine. And that can happen if this area gets plugged up, then air begins to take the path of least resistance, so it becomes easier to go around the filter than through the filter. Or if this isn't clipped in all the way, if you didn't get this tab into that slot down there, that could cause a problem. So that's one of the first things you want to look at. That gives you an idea of the condition of the system. So one thing I like to do when I remove screws is I like to see, are the screws I'm removing the same or different? In this case, this top one is so obviously different from this bottom one, I'll never worry about confusing them. But sometimes they're very similar lengths, and so you need to keep track of that. And what I'll do when I remove bolts is I'll always do a quick comparison, and if they're the same, or if they're so different you couldn't get it wrong, I'll just throw them in there off to the side. But if they're more, if they're more close to being able to be, you know, switched around, mixed up, then I'll keep more careful track. So here, normally you have basically a linkage from the trigger, and then you'll have some sort of choke linkage. And so you just kind of got to fiddle with this a little bit as you try and get it loose. So there's your air filter loose. We'll give that a really good clean. There's your little carburetor. You can have a couple different lines going to here. What you pretty much always have is you have an impulse connection to the engine, which basically makes the fuel pump do its job. Sometimes that is a fuel, sometimes it's a physical line. In other cases, it's just a little port like it is on this one, and it connects up to one of these little holes here to get the fuel pump effect. So you wanna just remove these things, keep an eye on what hole they go to. This is also a good chance to either mark that hole with a Sharpie, you know, red for choke, blue for trigger or something, or just examine, when I go to reassemble this, could I get this wrong? In this case, there's only two holes. I know which one's the choke and which one's the throttle, so I don't need to mark anything. But if you have a bunch of different holes to choose from, like on a lawnmower sometimes, or a generator, then you wanna mark those. And then same thing with the fuel lines. I have two fuel lines. The question is, when I go to reassemble this, could I get this mixed up? And I mean, you'd really have to try to mix this up, because this one is so super long, and it's pretty obvious that it goes all the way over here, and this one's not. So I wouldn't mark these, and you could take a picture with your phone if you wanted, if you were nervous about getting them wrong, but in this case, it's pretty easy. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to pull fuel lines off. It's kind of like the Chinese finger trap. As you pull, it tightens down on this barb, and the barbs are designed to keep those things on. So what you want to do is you really want to sort of push and pry, and you obviously need to do that carefully, but normally just a slotted, what is sometimes called a flathead screwdriver incorrectly, a slotted screwdriver is the best choice. And you just kind of start working it off, and then you can twisting them often breaks the seal. Now, often I'll be replacing these lines, so I'm not real careful, but in this case, I don't think I'll replace them. So sometimes fuel will squirt out if the tank hasn't vented, and especially if you've been shaking the machine, there's a little bit of pressure that's built up in there, so that's nothing to worry about. Okay, so you can see this carburetor is fairly dirty on the outside, which is not, I mean, it's not a problem for a carburetor to be filthy on the outside, but it does give you a hint as to its condition. If I open up a machine and it's squeaky clean, that generally tells me something about either how old it is, or it tells me something about the owner and operator. So I don't know that there's anything wrong inside this carburetor, but since I have it out, I will be taking a look inside just so that it doesn't give her trouble when I give it back to her. And it's not squeaky clean. There's a little bit. There's really nothing in the strainer. And yeah, that looks fine. It's worth doing anyway, though. Trying to do a few more of these long format videos. Seems like people are interested in. So, all right, this is called the metering diaphragm. The diaphragm always goes on top of the gasket. So if you forget or mix that up, that's a 100% universal rule. And this disc always faces down. And there, you might grab another metering diaphragm that looks very similar, but always keep in mind, sometimes they have this little post and sometimes they're flat. And you want this to be soft and supple, kind of like fabric. If it's crinkly and crunchy, that's bad. And I'm not really seeing any major problems here. So I'm gonna clean the inside and the outside of this anyway, just because I have it apart, and that makes perfect sense. But it's probably fine inside. The machine didn't actually have any running problems. In fact, it didn't really have any complaints at all. I just noticed that when I went to prime it for her, it was bad. Okay, so on the primer bulb, this is an area where you might wanna take a picture with your phone if you haven't done this a lot, or you know, pay close attention as to what line goes where. Basically, this primer bulb has a 2-finger pinch design to get it out. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second, once it's out. And I'm just gonna pry this little fuel line off, otherwise he's gonna get taut. And I'll show you a trick or two about primer bulbs, essentially universal rules about them. And I should say purge bulb. There's a slight difference between primer and purge. Okay, so on most purge bulbs, you have 2 ports and 1 port is longer. And the longer port is the outlet. And you can test that like that. As you push the bulb, where does the fluid come out of? And it achieves that through a series of, well, not even a series, just a check valve inside of here. And I'll show you what that looks like for those who are curious. My razor knife's a little bit dull. Okay, so that little orange thing is a check valve. And the way that it operates is, sorry, off camera. So if you look right here, as I pinch this, it opens. There's a little tiny mouth in there. And basically that mouth, what happens is when you depress the purge bulb, or the primer bulb, as you depress this, fuel shoots down that little mouth, or, oh, sorry. Fuel goes down the center of this thing and forces this little mouth to open. But then when you lift the purge valve, purge bulb, sorry, when you lift the bulb and you get low pressure up top, then you get pressure on the bottom. But instead of that pressure pushing that mouth open, instead it pushes up this flap all around, this donut flap. And so basically the fuel goes down through the center but comes up through the top. And that's how they achieve a very low cost one-way valve. And basically this shorter port connects to this outer area here, and this taller port connects to this center tube. And this little bulbous piece here is essentially an O-ring that seals this outer chamber from this inner tube. So anyway, that's how purge bulb works. And if you've done enough carb work, then you've probably ordered a bunch of kits and you have a bunch of these things lying around. Sometimes they're mounted with 2 screws like this. Sometimes they clip in like this. And you can see they all have 2 ports, and they're all either, they all have a long and a short port. I've never seen, I mean, unless we're talking really old machines, I've always seen them where one's longer and one's shorter, and I've always seen it where the longer one is the outlet. So that's easy enough to pop back into place. Now, you may all of a sudden say, oh shoot, I don't remember which one was which. And there's different ways to figure that out. One thing is that basically you can trace the fuel lines. So a carb normally has 2 lines in and out, and you can normally trace that back easily. I know that this is the inlet because it's going to the fuel pump side of the cubed carburetor, and this little swimming pool looking area is my fuel pump, and where my thumbs are now are the inlet and outlet valves that act as a check valve. This is the metering side where the other port is. So I know that this is my inlet, and so then I can also, if I need to, and I've forgotten, I can remove this cap and I can look to see where these go. One is in and one is out. You'll know that the inlet line has a filter at the end of it. So let's just, well, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to lose all the fuel. So basically what we do with the purge bulb is, as we push this, we pull fresh fuel up through the inlet line, which has the filter attached to it, and we push out an air and fuel mixture, which eventually becomes essentially just a fuel mixture. And so you could call this a primer bulb, but it's a little bit more accurate and helpful to call it a purge bulb because you are purging the air out of the system. All right, I'm not going to run the video while I do all the cleaning and reassembly, but basically reassembly is reverse order. Take your time to be very clean. Think like surgical level cleanliness, because at the end of the day, inside of here, you have teeny tiny passages that are almost approaching the level of the human hair. And so you may say like, oh, there's not much dirt, but pretty much any dirt will cause problems, or at least can cause problems. So give this a good clean. You can do it in your kitchen sink, use a paintbrush or something like that to push away all the debris. You can use a can of carb cleaner to get in there. But one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to shove a carb cleaner like straw nozzle into these holes and spray, because there are check valves in here. They're very lightweight, delicate pieces of plastic and polymer, and the velocity of the carb spray flying through there can actually dislodge and bother them. So if you do use carb spray, do it a little bit from a distance, or do it very lightly so that you get the fluid moving through the system without the force of the fluid dislodging check valves and things like that. All right, I hope that that was helpful to somebody. I have a few other videos on these sorts of things, but I hadn't yet done one on a Echo chainsaw. And I'm a huge fan of Echo. They don't have the same brand power like Stihl and Husqvarna, but I think they are of equivalent quality. They're also the only Japanese manufacturer of chainsaws that's really well known, I should say. You know, Stihl, Husqvarna, Echo are kind of the big 3 in the United States. Among normal people, not necessarily among, you know, avid chainsaw enthusiasts, but normal folks. And Echo is great, in my opinion, very easy to work on. The Japanese have mastered that sort of serviceability in their engineering. And so if you have an Echo, hang on to it. And if you're thinking of an Echo in general, I would say go for it, safe choice. And if you're having a problem like the one I described today, I hope this video helped you. If not, tell me that you hated it by giving me a thumbs down, and go check out Steve's Small Engine Saloon. All sorts of interesting things going on his channel, and I hope you'll find him more interesting and more helpful than you found me. All right, folks, take care.